one of the key backdrops to the contract campaign and the eventual strike was that it resonated so well with the overall feeling of working class Americans that something had to be done, that people should not have to be always working under such stressful conditions. So it kind of hit a nerve, I think, that really resonated with the public.
That is Rand Wilson. In 1997, Rand was in the war room, though his opponent didn't really know that a war was afoot. In the Parcel and Small Package division of the Teamsters Union, Rand was strategizing with top leadership. He was drafting research pamphlets and other materials, figuring out, with the help of the workers themselves, how they would get 185,000 UPSers. That's roughly 1 in every 550 workers in the private sector that year. How they would get them prepared to strike if they needed to when their contract expires that summer. That August, they were prepared, and they did strike. And in the end, they won. Hello, my name is Teddy Ostro. Welcome to the Upsurge, a podcast about UPS, the Teamsters, and the future of the American labor movement. What we seek to do in this podcast is unpack the unprecedented labor fight this year at United Parcel Service. In July, the contract of 350,000 UPS workers will expire. That is the largest private sector bargaining agreement in the United States. And there's a chance we will see them strike, which would be one of the largest strikes in U.S. history. In this episode, we dive into actually the last national UPS strike, which happened in 1997. And like the potential strike this year at UPS, it's been called the strike of a generation. Part of that, of course, was the size of the strike and the financial damage it caused. 185,000 workers stopped working for 15 days. At the time, the U.S. had seen nothing like that for more than a decade, and it hasn't seen anything like that since. Now, mind you, deliveries weren't nearly as big as they are today, but they were pretty major by 1997. Millions of packages went undelivered, while hundreds of thousands more crushed the U.S. Postal Service that became the de facto alternative while workers withheld their labor. UPS was losing an estimated $40 million a day in business, and by the end of the strike, in 2022 dollars, they lost over $1 billion. People in the labor movement were really excited about the strike, especially because it was successful. There are few better people to talk about the 1997 strike than Rand Wilson, who was a communications coordinator of the UPS contract campaign at the time. With Rand, we explore the history of the strike, as well as some of its prehistory. As I said last episode, you can't understand the potential strike this year without understanding 1997. And you can't understand 1997 without understanding some of the history of the Teamsters Union. Rand and I spoke a lot about that, including the tensions between factions within the union. On one side, the corrupt old guard decried as business unionists for running the union like, well, a business. And on the other, reformers of the union, who ultimately were the leaders of the strike. Now, those tensions within the union haven't gone away, and they are still a driving force of what's going on at the Teamsters right now. We'll talk about that too. But before you hear from Rand, we wanted you to hear about the 1997 strike from the rank and file themselves. Last episode, we spoke to two UPSers from the Teamsters Local 804 in New York. They had a lot more to say than what you heard, so we thought you'd like to hear a bit more from Antoine and Tony Rosario. Here's what they remember when they were young men hitting the picket line in 1997.
One of the things that I remember, Anthony and I, were young lads. And, the only difference is that, I know the viewers can't see me. I have a bald head. I had some hair on my head, and Anthony's hair was so much lengthier than what it is now. But all I remember, I have a clear vision of being on that picket line.
See them now because they're all gone. Walk a picket line.
185,000 drivers and package handlers hit the picket lines at midnight.
A bunch of the senior guys were just yelling and screaming as the trucks were, leaving the building. These trucks were being driven by what we call scabs. Scabs are people that the company would suddenly hire who would not be experienced and as professional as we would be doing the job. Yeah, that's what I remember. And I remember being told, kid, you have to be out here every day until the strike is over. And this guy was so, muscular, and his voice was very deep. And I said, you know what? I'll be here.
I mean, I go back to that strike line, and I like Antoine, remember vividly being on that picket line. I remember the camaraderie.
They picked up the gauntlet on behalf of all American workers and their families. And their struggle is now our struggle.
Barbecuing, the trucks would go by and honk their horns. Where me and Antoine grew up at Foster Avenue, I like to say that's where we grew up. Right across the street, there is a sanitation. The sanitation workers were great. As they came in and out, they'd always show us a lot of love. A couple times they dropped us off some water. I remember at the time, then president of our 804 was a man by the name of Howie Redmond. He gave me the bullhorn, and I remember I was yelling really loud a couple of Spanish profanities. I'm Puerto Rican, so I must have went in about 6 or 7 minutes, if that. It may have been even shorter, before the cops came over and threatened to arrest me and take it away. I do remember there was a lot of companies that were, begging us to come back to work. At the time, also, the government wanted to get involved, and the president himself was, from what I understand, asking for them to come back to the table. And the international president at the time, Ron Carey, who actually came out of Local 804, had a very hard stance and told them, you want us to come back to the table? You are talking to the wrong people.
What's their position? To move it more in the direction, expand even more part-time, low-wage, throwaway jobs. That's not what America wants. That's not what our community wants, and certainly that's not what Teamster families want.
I mean, they thought they had us sunk. They thought within the first week everybody was going to start running back to work. They didn't realize the resolve that these workers had. I think it took 15 days in total before they bend the knee, and they understood these workers are not playing. It's time to step up, Buttercup, and give us what you're supposed to.
Has to tell these corporations in this country, enough is enough.
It's the MIBs. They call them MIBs. There go the men in brown. UPS men dressed in brown all over town. Come to your door, face to face, lay the package down. Deliver to you and me, MIB. Uglier clothes you will not see. You don't see them now because they're all gone. Walking picket lines.